Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today as a part of the William T. Grant webinar series. The last time we gathered was about a year ago when your chapters were at the earliest versions. So it's really special that we have an opportunity to spend time thinking aloud about your completed chapters included in the section of the edited volume titled Our Theories Take Place. My name is Jade Nixon, and I'm the section editor of Our Theories Take Place. And I'm also a PhD candidate at the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto. The collection of writing in Our Theories Take Place emerges from the belief that place, as Black studies scholar Catherine McKittrick writes, is where we know from. In this section, authors emphasize place as a first teacher on theories of Blackness, of indigeneity, racialization, and racism. What authors learn in the agricultural field, at the Highway Border Patrol checkpoint, and on Mama's front porch emphasize what is missing from their disciplinary training. Such places are also compasses that help authors find their way to ideas, language, stories, and people beyond their disciplines that account for their experiences. So I'm here today with Dr. Teresa Rocha Birdall, and she's an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Washington, specializing in the study of race, power, policing, and tribal sovereignty. Have to go to my phone now. I'm also here with Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr., who's an assistant professor of educational leadership and policy and analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His interdisciplinary research and teaching are concerned with the racialized realities of charter schools and school choice policy and practice, and also and Black freedom dreams and practices as well. So thank you both for being here. The last person I'll introduce is Dr. Mayra Puente, who's an assistant professor in the School of Education at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she examines the intersections between race, space, and college opportunities for rural Latinx youth. Thank you all so much for being here to share more about your ideas in the chapter with me and those who will be tuning in. In the first part of our time together, I'll invite each of you one by one to introduce your chapter and read part of your chapter with us. And in the second part of our time together, it will be similar to like a Q&A or discussion segment where I'll pose one or two questions and invite you to respond. So let's begin by learning about each chapter included in the section of the edited volume titled Our Theories Take Place, directly from authors. Teresa, can you get us started?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Jade. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Jade said, my name is Teresa Rocha Birdall. I am an assistant professor of sociology, but more so I'm a mom and a cousin and a sister and an auntie. Broadly speaking, my scholarship examines how legal actors enact state violence by marking select populations as undeserving of protection. So in one research thread, what I do is I investigate the relationship between tribal sovereignty and family policing. And I'm currently working on a 3-year William T. Grant Foundation study exploring how tribal sovereignty can be leveraged to protect Native youth and families in the child welfare system. And in the second thread, I studied the political economy of policing and the interconnected role that legal actors and city officials play in preventing police accountability. And so my ongoing research really mixes the two together to show that the extractive nature of settler colonialism has very real, enduring impacts on the likelihood that Native people will be disproportionately exposed to the criminal justice system. So today I'm going to read an excerpt from my chapter titled Toward a Sociology of Indigenous Placemaking. This chapter shares the concept of Indigenous placemaking, which is really designed to counter the erasure of Indigenous knowledge and experiences from sociological study. This excerpt is a reflection about really my movement between my childhood home in San Diego with my siblings and my parents and my graduate training in upstate New York, and how I kind of opened up my thinking about how to engage indigeneity in my discipline. So I will start with the reading. After a week with my sister in the sun-drenched landscape of our youth, I gave her a great big hug and returned to New York and the sociological training that awaited me there. It was still very early in my graduate program, and I spent much of my time learning how the discipline defined itself and thought of its contributions. So when friends and family back home would ask what I was learning, I would explain, just like I would to my undergrads, that sociology is the study of social groups, how they come to be, how they function, and how interactions between group members create change in society. So much like other scholars who are first generation, your community is so very proud of you and what you're doing. And they were, my family and friends were so proud that I was in my PhD training, and they would often ask, what are you finding? Like, what is it that you're working on? It seems like you have new tools to ask these really hard, big questions. And honestly, I never knew how to respond. I would say, thank you so much, Auntie. Like, yes, that we're doing really important work. But what I didn't know how to share or respond was that in the sociological tradition, Indigenous peoples were missing, erased, and cast out of sociological analysis. And when we were present, we were a problem, we were incomplete, or we were some sort of footnote in a larger empirical or theoretical intervention. And I never really wanted to say that part, so I would just explain how the discipline worked and how I saw myself and ourselves fitting within it. But as my training progressed, I realized that there were so many things about my discipline that I could not have understood until I arrived at my doctoral training. For one, I thought that sociology's emphasis on studying social problems would provide me with accessible tools to do something about those social problems, particularly those affecting my Mexican and Native family. Instead, the discipline's investment extended to only certain inequalities and only for particular social groups, and those groups were not my own. Second, I also realized that place as a dynamic social force seemed to matter very little in my training. This meant that my coursework paid little attention to people like me and my lived experiences, whether it was at a border patrol checkpoint, which I write about in this chapter, or the spaces between tribal reservations and nearby cities and towns where I spent much of my childhood. Instead, in this disciplinary tradition, place was often construed as a canvas or an abstraction upon which social life played out. And together, these omissions reinforced my determination to build a research agenda that could articulate the relationship between state violence and racialized place-based experiences using the language of those who endured it, and thus have the demand, power, and intergenerational knowledge to change it. In the following chapter, or the chapter that I'm sure we'll all be linked to for all of our work, I share the concept of Indigenous placemaking to really counter the sociological erasure that I described, to reframe place as an active and dynamic social actor. This Indigenous intellectual practice that I distill and share, it is not a concept or an idea of my own. It is one that I have learned from many, many teachers over time. It is designed to fill a sociological gap and communicate what I and so many others know to be honest and complex and felt and true in the world. So drawing from the work of several Indigenous scholars and thinkers, I define Indigenous placemaking in three parts. The first is that it is a tribally specific understanding and engagement with place as a system of reciprocal relations and obligations. Second is the recognition that land is a relative and a teacher that offers vital instructions about upholding responsibilities between peoples, landscapes, and non-human kin. Third, and most apparent to me in my encounter with my sister, which you can read about in the chapter at a checkpoint, is that Indigenous placemaking is a solidarity practice that empowers Indigenous peoples to refuse the permanence of settler colonialism as an unmovable reality. And so this three-part framing is designed to foreground Indigenous perspectives and sociological studies. It's also designed to really emphasize place as a mode of relationality. So by framing land as dynamic and agentic, sociological research, I argue, can better analyze and theorize how place truly matters, not only for its geography, but as part of a social space that is defined by indigeneity, relationality, and is imbued with possibility for interdependent futures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing more about your chapter and for really emphasizing what you conceptualize. And that's like learned from a bunch of Indigenous scholars, Indigenous placemaking, and also thinking about placemaking that emphasizes land. So thank you. Kevin, would you like to share next?
Yes, thank you so much, Jade. And thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr. And the title of the chapter is They Are Here With Me, Critical Race Theories from My Flesh. And ultimately what this chapter is really trying to unravel and really get into is thinking about how the learning that we have from the university at times is in tension with the learning that we have from our families and from our home spaces, and particularly those people of our flesh, our ancestors, that shape who we are and inform the work that we do. And so I tried in the chapter to discuss some of the theories that I've learned from them that preceded my graduate school training, and in fact, inform and really course through my thinking about race and inequality. And so I'll read a bit from the introduction of this chapter that gives a kind of layout of my work, as well as what the chapter is about. And I hope that in your spare time that you will take some time to engage the reading. They are here with me, critical race theories from my flesh. How might we understand mourning when the event has yet to end? Cydia Hartman. Perhaps it is the heart and not the mind where our memories, dreams, and hopes reside. I was a senior in high school when my heart shattered, spilling its contents through my tears. I remember it well. Sitting beside my grandmother, my upper torso leaning against her then strong legs, legs whose strength was later hollowed out by what I believe was the same thing to break my heart, Hurricane Katrina. Or perhaps more precisely, what the hurricane indexed. Living in the wake of disaster, ecological devastation, of precarity, of racial capitalism, of understanding, as Christina Sharp says, the totality of our environment is anti-Black. We watched as the news showcased the flooding, spoke of bloated cadavers in flood waters, people atop roofs pleading to be rescued, others waiting in the water. And then there were Black people who, like our enslaved ancestors, escaped their dire circumstance of water captivity, but were described as being in possession of something stolen. Fugitives, criminals, looters to be sure, those that violated the property interests of capitalist white supremacy. As nearly 20 of us refugees watched in horror at my aunt and uncle's home in Houston, we knew our world would forever be changed. We also intimately knew of the protracted violence of white supremacy and state disinvestment, and how those fatal couplings located us within precincts of vulnerability. Hurricane Katrina and the resulting policy disaster has been instrumental in my theorizing around anti-Blackness and power. But in 2005 at 17, I didn't have the language to describe the ghostly matters of anti-Blackness or the afterlife of slavery that did and does continue to contour my life, my family, and those within my community. Yet, like bell hooks, I came to theory because I was hurting. And it is the pain of white supremacy and the knowledge of Black persistence and resistance that shapes my research on neoliberal educational restructuring and the ways that Black people experience, understand, pick up, and continue, and contest market-based reforms. And that work is shaped by Black studies and critical race theory. And so I understand that tradition of Black studies and critical race theory as a challenge to the symbolic and material conditions and orders that govern large-scale structures and processes and logics that secure white dominance and white supremacy. And at base, what I see is these approaches, these ways of thinking and being as textured and in many ways work to subvert white supremacy. And so these approaches work to honor the humanity of Black people, Black place, Black imaginations and desires, the textured and sometimes contradictory performances of Blackness and Black politics. And it illuminates, as Horton Spillers would say, the richness of possibility that animates and grounds Black life and works to refuse and subvert and dismantle those oppressions. And so this necessarily means that I approach the work that I do as an ethical project that's rooted in Black liberation and care. And it also means working in community and centering perspectives and methods and approaches that exceed, for instance, traditional European academic norms and venues. And so Gloria Ladson-Billings, in her journal text toward a theory of culturally relevant pedagogy, remarked that one of the challenges of traditional education research is that it has failed to make explicit its theoretical underpinnings, and that in some quarters, that work is seen as atheoretical. And what is more, those Western regimes of truth often erase or obfuscate the role of power and positionality in knowledge production and the narratives and stories we tell of ourselves and about others. And so at base, as Sylvia Wynter would remind us, we are a storytelling species, and those stories may very well cohere around a set of mythological premises that aid and abet in dispossession, and stories that may also be life-giving and life-sustaining, and dare I say even heretical, in as much as they lay bare an attempt to dethrone the orthodoxy of oppression. And so as a consequence, our research tells a story and is undergirded by a host of conceptual markings and theoretical tattoos that adorn the body of our work. And so my theoretical tattooing is first informed by the stories and wisdom of my grandmother and community. And the texture of that work is also shaped by my own personal experiences. And these intimate relations of people and place have a bearing on the body of my work. And I've been committed, the work that I've committed to and been called to do. And it is from these locations, often seen as new sense and not a site of nuance in traditional Western scholarship, is that where I arrive to the page, to the program, to the project, understanding and remembering that the insights and ways of knowing and being from the people and places that have shaped me are, as Terrion Williamson remarks, as appropriate and necessary a starting place as any other. And so this chapter is a humble engagement with the theories of my flesh, so to speak, that were born out of necessity. And it illuminates an engagement with thinkers from Black studies and its impact on my research on and experiences with post-Katrina educational reforms. And it traces my initial engagement with critical race theory and considers how those current conversations that focus on the human and on ontology and on man have deepened my understandings of issues around liberalism, political economy, and the conditions of crisis that shape school reform. So I hope that you would engage the chapter and feel free to reach out to me in whatever mode seems most appropriate. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing from your chapter, and not to flatten all that you share, but I really appreciate that you offer a story of heartbreak, but also one of love and care from your grandma and community, your aunts, your grandma's friends. So thank you for offering that to us and also to those that will tune in later. Dr. Myra Puente, do you want to share next?
Yes, thank you, Jade, for the introduction and for being our amazing editor. She's really pushed my chapter, I think, to be what it is today. Thank you all for joining the webinar, and thank you to the William T. Grant Foundation for supporting this work. My name is Mayra Puente, and I'm an assistant professor of higher education at UC Santa Barbara, and I'm zooming you all today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, otherwise known as Los Angeles to settlers and outsiders. My chapter for today is called Central California is Completely Different, Theorizing Racialization in the San Joaquin Valley Through a Rural Latinx Onto-Epistemological Spatial Perspective. And the first part of the title is actually a direct quotation from a rural Latinx student who participated in a research study that I conducted about the intersections between race, place, and college access. And I really think that this student's words perfectly capture the argument that I'm trying to make in this chapter about the importance of studying place and being attuned to spatial differences, especially as scholars of race and scholars hoping to dismantle inequity. In this chapter, I really oscillate between my upbringing in the San Joaquin Valley of California, which is this agricultural region in the center of the state that yields the most produce and actually feeds the entire nation and the world. And I describe my experiences growing up in this area as a daughter of Mexican immigrant farm workers and witnessing racial oppression daily manifesting in my community. And I contrast those personal experiences with my academic and professional training in theories of race, which I felt failed to really capture the specificity of racism and racialization that I saw happening in the San Joaquin Valley, impacting people who look like me and labor in the fields like my parents. So for today, I've pieced together sections and sentences from my chapter that I think best illuminate these various aspects about the centrality of place in my research, about the importance of lived experience in the theories that I use and that I hope to develop, and about the importance of including youth and my community members in my theorizing process. So I'll go ahead and read from my chapter. I looked up at my ama, noticing the decades of sun damage on her face, and then at my appa, whose chest and brazos poked through the multiple holes in his long sleeve shirt. My heart palpitated as I struggled to find the words to translate the take it or leave it attitude of the white male farm owner to my parents. The farm owner had just announced that he would no longer be paying his promised piece rate for harvesting his grapes. Among my family, other farm workers negotiated between staying and working for significantly reduced pay or leaving with no pay. We had already lost sleep, time, and money to arrive at the fields. Peering into the crowd of ambivalent farm workers, my 8-year-old self was struck by a harsh reality. Only people who looked like me were in the fields, choosing between laboring or hungering. This incident is one of many firsthand experiences that taught me about racialization. While I did not have the academic language to name these experiences as racialization, I knew how racialization felt, whom it affected, and where it took place. This chapter centers the where in my growing understanding of racialization, my farm working community's ongoing experiences with racial oppression, and my research projects with rural Latinx youth have taught me about the significance and specificity of place in processes of racialization. My formal training in theories of race began when I left the San Joaquin Valley agricultural region for college. I pursued a transdisciplinary undergraduate education, specializing in fields like political science, Chicano studies, and education studies. My academic training was supplemented by my mentorship with Dr. Daniel Solorzano at UCLA, who introduced me to critical race theory, Latino critical race theory, and Chicana feminisms. I was particularly drawn to the work of critical race theorists and Chicana feminists who deem lived experience as a valid mode of analysis from which to construct knowledge. I came to recognize that I may have lacked the theoretical language to name my experiences with racialization at 8 years old, but I did not lack the knowledge. The knowledge I carried was produced from living and learning in a politically conservative agricultural region dominated by white interests. Critical race theorists and Chicana feminists have legitimized this way of knowing for me. They have contributed to my theoretical perspective that rural Latinx youth and all students of color are inherently holders and creators of knowledge, and that this knowledge should inform and be evident in our theories of race. I extended my critical race and Chicana feminist training to include critical theories of space. Dr. Solorzano and Dr. Veronica Velez collectively developed critical race spatial analysis, which is this framework designed to study and also map the intersections between race, space, and education. Through this framework, Vero and Danny assert that spatial knowledge is hypothetical at best if it excludes the critical expertise of community members who are directly impacted by the spatial expression of a racist US landscape. We are inherently carriers and producers of spatial wisdom because of our occupancy in multiple marginalized spaces. The margin from this perspective is a site of possibility from which to theorize about the social spatial world. I began to theorize about race and racism more confidently from the rural ontological and epistemological standpoint that I occupy. The knowledge I was searching for about racialization in rural spaces across academic disciplines and theoretical perspectives had always been innate. I conducted a research study with rural Latinx youth from my community and surrounding rural communities in the San Joaquin Valley region about the intersections between race, space, and college access. The conversations with rural Latinx youth revealed their profound understanding of place-based racialization. The youth, who were untrained in theories of race, meticulously and loudly detailed how they experienced racism in their rural communities. Yet their voices and contributions to knowledge production are largely absent in educational research, policy, and practice. The erasure of rural Latinx knowledges is indicative of a pervading belief in the social sciences that the mind is separate from the body and the body from the land. My employment of critical race feminists and spatial epistemologies necessitates that I anchor theorizations of race and racism in the lived experiences of rural Latinx youth, and that I further invite them to co-construct knowledge with me about our shared racialized experiences in the San Joaquin Valley. Positioning youth and community members as experts of their lives and of their needs advances their rights to self-determination and self-preservation. It also researches a relationship between mind, body, land that Western understandings of place as separate from self seek to invalidate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myra, for sharing from your chapter. And I really appreciate that your chapter begins with this really poignant story of you being like a little girl in the agricultural fields with your parents. You can read that story, folks, who are tuning in, when you read the chapter. And then your story ends with you like returning or like engaging or inviting rural Latinx young people from your community to like inform your own work and also to invite them to be expertise and collaborators. I think it was really beautiful, the kind of like full circle of your story. So thank you all again for sharing from your chapter. I think what you share about place is so capacious and so full and complex that we all have so much to learn from your story of place and your reading of place. So again, thank you. We're going to move into the second part of our time together, which is a discussion or kind of like a Q&A, an informal Q&A. So I'm going to pose the first question to you all, or invite you all to respond to this first question, which is, if you had read your chapter in the early stages of your graduate training, what could it have made possible for you and your work? So I'll invite anyone to go, and then you can just like go next after each other.
Yeah, I can share. I think for me, one of the main purposes of my chapter was really to document for the first time this genealogy of the multiple disciplines and theoretical perspectives and faculty mentors who have helped shape my understanding of racialization. So it was actually a really fruitful process for me to think about these various experiences together that have helped me to understand the way that I look at the world, right, and the way that I understand these social and spatial issues. And in this chapter, I also talk about how I at times felt excluded and invisible, even within these theories of race, right? That did speak to my racialized subjectivity, but it didn't speak to my ontology as this rural Latina, because most of these theories focused on racial issues that were manifesting in urban places. So I think for me, if I had read my chapter early on during my graduate training, it would have helped me to understand that I can look outside of the field of education studies for answers to these problems, right? I think Teresa Wright was mentioning during her reading of the chapter of how we often think about our fields in a way that they're going to provide us with these tools, right, to solve these issues that are occurring in our communities. But I think we can also look to other disciplines that exist to really build this complex solution or understanding of these problems and a better way to address them versus when we're solely restricted to our respective fields. So I hope that it does show, right, students maybe who are viewing this or reading our chapters, that taking this transdisciplinary approach, especially when it comes to equity work, should be something that's celebrated, right, in our respective programs. And another point I think for me is that I was always looking, right, in fields and within books for answers to problems that were occurring in my community. And I think that students are not often told, right, to look within themselves and to look at their own systems of knowing and to start from there. And that's how you should approach research, right, from a very intimate, personal approach. That's not really celebrated, right, because of the objectivity and neutrality that is preserved in academia. So I think reading this chapter would have showed me that my knowledge was always innate, right? And I had knowledge that was passed down to me by my family, community, and ancestors. And when we start from that knowledge, right, it actually helps us to generate ideas and theories that are more relevant to our work and more relevant to our community's daily experiences with racialization.
Thanks, Myra. Kevin or Teresa, do you want to respond to this question?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I think Myra said it all, right? In many ways. I think about Miles Horton, who was one of the leaders of the Highlander Folk School, who often trained those that were involved in the civil rights movement in the United States. And he has this phrase, which I'm paraphrasing, and it's the people with the problem or the people with the solution. And I think oftentimes when we come to graduate school or graduate training or any type of professional training, particularly in education or any of the helping fields, quote unquote, we think that we might gain or know something more or learn something different that will impact or change or save our communities. And in many ways, I think this chapter and I think this process of writing this chapter reminded me that we already had the answers. We already knew the things. Oftentimes, what it seems to me as it relates to educational research and research in general is that the people with the problem are written about or discussed or talked about, but never really truly seen as central to the solution. And so as I reflect back on my experience sitting on my grandmother's porch and talking to her friends and listening to their way of knowing and seeing and understanding the world, it's shaped by what Toni Morrison talks about as discredited knowledge. And that discredited knowledge by the Academy was really the knowledge that saved me, that sustained me, that kept me. And so as I think about what they were able to offer me, which was really an interpretive authority about understanding the world that differed from, I think, the logics that are often told in the media or in academic discourse. So for me, this chapter reminded me that how central it was to bring that knowledge, to bring that experience, to bring our ancestors and their ancestral wisdom and the people that are still here with us to these spaces. Oftentimes we go into graduate programs and sometimes we have imposter syndrome and we're reading Foucault and Derrida and all these other people. And really, I realized my grandmother was saying the same thing that Foucault was saying. She just didn't use as long of a sentence. And so, you know, it's understanding that those things, those ways of knowing and being are so central, and to never lose sight of that as we matriculate through these programs and as we're exposed to these high theorists and approaches and methods that often are counter to how we are and who we are. And the other thing I think is important, and I was really fortunate in graduate school, was that I chose a program with people that were interested in critical approaches. And so it wasn't foreign to be thinking about issues of race and inequality and centering the perspectives of Black women and Black theorists. And so if you're a grad student listening to this, also to remember to find a place that also can be a home space for you, even if it is in the academy, and that honors your home and your space, because that can also be part of how we have these conflicts in graduate school when we're in classes and working with people that have no interest in truly who we are and what we have to offer.
Thank you, Kevin. Teresa?
Whew, the two of you just like brought it completely. I think maybe I'll just circle back around to maybe a personal example of how I think my early graduate training would have changed. And I think that honestly, if I had read my chapter or some sort of version of this idea of Indigenous placemaking that was solidified into the study of place, I think it would have radically changed my research trajectory. So my work today, I mean, I study policing and family policing, but they were never separate experiences. And as policed and marginalized and surveilled peoples, we know that these multiple intersecting systems of oppression, it's not just one touch at a time, but they lock in. And so my original doctoral dissertation and research proposal really looked at these policing and family policing together. And we just had a lot of arguments with my faculty about why place mattered, particularly why this kind of settler idea of thinking about place not as place, but as territory and as a place or a capacity for violence. I would have fought harder for that. And I would have said, I'm not going to separate the two inequalities and oppressive systems, I'm going to study them together because we have the analytical and statistical tools to do that. But we just didn't understand each other. And the second thing is that I always felt like, and I was told this directly and indirectly in several ways, that leaving the university for, a long weekend or to fly back to California over winter break, that was somehow not serious. That was like, I could have been spending that time in the library or in my windowless office, in the sociology department. And that I knew that was wrong, and I did it anyway, but I would have had clearer language to explain and describe why it's important that we are with our communities, and why our communities, as Myra and Kevin beautifully described, they are our first teachers, they are our ongoing teachers, they are how we make sense of the world. And go home and take every moment you have to be with the people who love and care for you, especially if you're spending a lot of your time, which a lot of us did, in some programs, trying to validate and justify the research questions that we were asking. And so I would just say, I think little me, younger me, would have just fought harder and longer.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm so excited for especially young, or not young, but emerging scholars, or like students that are like early on in their graduate school training, to read your chapters, because I think so much of the time, or I'm going to speak for myself, but when I arrived in university, even at the undergraduate level, what I was learning and what I was like listening to really within the university, like I really felt like I was empty before I got there. Like it was like, or like I could only learn there. That was the only place that I could learn from. And like I hadn't learned anything until I arrived there. But I think that what your chapters really emphasizes, that there's like, and you said this before, Kevin, there's so much learning preceded the university. Like it happened before the university, and it's so exciting to know that folks will read this, particularly for racialized folks, for Black and Indigenous folks will read, graduate students early on in their training will read this, and hopefully know that you know things already. Like you know things, and your knowing began long before you like attended undergrad, or long before you started graduate school training. So thank you all for making that really clear and making that central, and making place super significant. Not only place, but the people that you love, the people that you care about in place, central and significant, and anchors to your thinking. The second question that I'll pose to y'all is, what do you hope readers and those tuning in learn from the story that you tell of place? Which is kind of similar to the last one, but a little different.
I'll jump in. I would want folks to, I think Teresa said, go home, right? And that the importance of going home. And I think for me, as well as the importance of going home and bringing home with you, right? To never lose focus of that, and to understand that place is a dynamic space that is often contested and is filled with such possibility. And as I think about how we might understand place, particularly as I think about New Orleans, which is a place that is intensifyingly being gentrified, and that is often becoming sites of ecological issues over and over and over again, with hurricanes and other state disinvestment. Like, to understand that that place, despite those systems and approaches that try to cut and often reshape that space to be something it isn't or wasn't intended to be, to understand that beauty that still exists in that place, and how that place and how that space offers sites and modes of resistance, and to never lose sight of that. I think, actually going back to the first question as well, part of my understanding of place as it related to graduate school was often thinking about all the problems, all the issues, using critical theory to uncover the terrors that existed. And I think, as I think about place, all of those things existed: terror, pain, capitalist dispossession, right? Like all of those things existed, And that place was so rich and full of possibility and resistance and people creating and sustaining their lives. And so as I think about the chapter and as we think about place, yes, there's dispossession, but also there's so much more. And to not ever lose sight of that as we situate our work and ourselves within the academy, but also the broader projects that we're engaged in. So for me, it's to hold those tensions in place, so to speak, and understanding that place holds those tensions as well. And it is our job to, in some ways, revere that and learn from that, and to see all those possibilities that exist within that place as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Myra, Teresa?
We're just going to keep clicking at the same time. No, it's a wonderful question. And Kevin, thank you for just like setting the stage so beautifully. I think that just reiterating and underscoring that you belong, your ideas, your families, your stories, your successes, your failures, in whatever way you imagine that to be true in the world, the complexity of who you are belongs in your intellectual work in the academy, because the complexity of who you are is in of itself a beautiful intellectual project. And so we are carrying generations of this complexity with us that the academy has, at least in my experience within it, has never even begun to scratch the surface of. And the way that we as peoples live and thrive and refuse and reshape our lived realities, I thought that's what sociology was supposed to do, because that is literally the definition of the discipline. But as Kevin said, it spent more time, and the discipline continues to do this at measuring with the most complex statistical tools the problems that the settler state created. And for me and for many of us, that's not the point of our lives. We are not the product of violence alone, but we are agentic people. And so I think just remembering, and I hope that people get that sense from our chapters in particular, that all of this complexity and messiness and beauty belong in your work and belong in the academy. And then I think that just keeping in mind too, that sometimes you may be the first of your family or the first person in your state or high school or whatever your story is. Some people might find themselves in a place where you feel alone. And I hope that by reading our chapters, you can kind of find your community, your intellectual community. So the three of us didn't know each other before, but now we're in this rich dynamic conversation together. And so that hold on to those beautiful, messy ideas and complexity of yourself, because you'll find your people. And as Kevin said, feel free to reach out to us, because we would love to continue to have this dialogue.
Thank you, Teresa. Myra?
Okay, I was checking if I was unmuted. Yeah, thank you all for taking the lead on answering the question. And the question again was, right, what do we hope that audience members can take away from our story? And I really tried to show two main things through this chapter. One of them was that place really helps to produce a particular type of experience with racism and racialization. And many people outside and inside of California, I think, tend to think of this state as this singular geography that's very progressive and liberal and diverse. And through this chapter, I really tried to show a different type of California, a California that I knew. And that's one that was filled with political, economic, and environmental violence and racism against undocumented Mexican immigrant and indigenous farm workers. So I hope that, yes, the audience understands right through all of our chapters that racism is this endemic, permanent, systemic, structural, global issue, but it is also very particular. And I think that's what all of our chapters tried to show, right? That we need to investigate these issues of race and racism at a very finite and small and granular community level, we need to analyze the where, right? That's a piece by Eve Tuck and Mackenzie, so that we can think more creatively, right, about the types of systems that we need to dismantle to pursue equity for all types of people, even people that are not within our immediate proximity or those outside of our spatial imaginations. A second thing that I really tried to show, and I really credit my early mentors like Dr. Daniel Solorzano and Dr. Veronica Velez, who are critical race theorists, right? But they would tell me that we can't just focus on racial oppression. What else is there, right, in our communities? What are the strengths, the knowledges, the wisdom, the resilience of our people? And Dr. Eve Tuck also has this article, right, about moving beyond damage-centered research. And so I really tried to balance that in this chapter and thinking about, okay, yes, place produces a particular type of racialized subjectivity and experience, but what are the knowledges that place also produces, right? And in this chapter as well, I didn't think it was enough to only talk about my own understanding and theorization of racialization. I also wanted to include the perspectives of rural Latinx youth who share a similar experience to me and are also the experts, right, of this process of racialization and the consequences that manifest in our community. So in this chapter, if you read through it, I give these various examples that you talk about, like not having access to clean water, not being able to spend quality time with their parents, right? Because their parents are constantly laboring in the fields from sunrise to sunset, not having access to sidewalks, all these various examples that youth were so quick to give when I asked them, right, can you identify what racism is and what it looks like? And so I think that's another takeaway, right, that when we provide young people and our community members with the space to talk about these structural large issues that we think only exist and can be defined in academia, our community members are ready, right? They're ready to define what these look like and they're ready to take action against them. So I really tried to show the brilliance and high levels of critical thinking and consciousness that exist in my community among youth. And so I think it's really important that we start to think of ourselves and think about youth and community members as these experts of these complex research topics.
Thank you all for answering this question so beautifully. I'm going to try and, like, in a very brief way, try to summarize all of the things that we hope readers take away from the chapters that you've written so beautifully. So Kevin, you offered that place is, yes, it can be, place can be a site of harm and violence, but it's also a site of beauty and of love and of joy and of resistance and of possibility. And I think that lends itself really well to what Myra just offered. And I think you mentioned Dr. Eve Tuck, who resists against damage-centered research and said things about what can happen if we center desire and expertise and the wisdom of our community, and especially young people. They have a lot to say and a lot to tell. And Teresa, you offered the encouragement that folks that are listening in or tuning in, particularly graduate students, and I'm not sure if you mentioned emphasize graduate students here, I am, but graduate students can really, it's really important to think that you belong or know that you belong and that you haven't met all the people that will be your people. They're in the world. Dr. Tuck always often says that sometimes, like, you haven't met all the people yet who will be in relation, you'll be in relationship with. And I really believe that to be true. And I think that might've been all. Did I miss anything in my little brief summary, off the cuff summary? But I hope that the folks that are reading these chapters or listening in or tuning in rather, really are able to take these things away. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. Thank you, Teresa, Myra, and Kevin, for gathering here today to share more of your work with me, with each other, and with those that will tune into the webinar in the future. I've learned so much from your stories of place that you tell in your chapters and the ways you make places like the checkpoint, or like your grandmother's front porch in New Orleans, Kevin, or like the agricultural fields, Myra, essential to your educational research that you make in the world. And I also, before we go, I also want to thank Ella for being here to support with tech today. Can't see Ella, but Ella is in the Zoom room. So thank you, Ella, for your support. And thank you, William T. Grant, for hosting us. And thank you to those who will be tuning in to the conversation sometime really soon.